Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me. I'm Lloyd Auerbach, a parapsychologist, mentalist sometime, and sometime chocolatier. Um, Good to see some folks here. Thanks for coming. And I hope you got some good questions for me or good topics to talk about. Uh, Ian, I see that we have Ian Gray from the UK who's been curious about PK stuff. Uh, and curious about my thoughts on table tilting. And hi, everybody else, Anne and Jody and Adam. So tilting or table tipping, that goes back way, way back in time, actually. But if we go to the spiritualist era in the 19th century, people were doing that assuming that they were in contact with spirits. You have to use a certain type of table, can't be a really heavy one typically. And it seems to work with the same unconscious motor impulses we have, muscle impulses, that things like pendulums work and the planchette of a Ouija board and automatic writing. But the idea would be for table tilting, you would be trying to contact spirits and having the table tap out or kind of bang out certain messages by asking yes or no questions. Sounds kind of familiar to perhaps some of the reality TV shows with the flashlight and other things like that. It's not much different than that, except that people are unconsciously in control of that. I've actually participated in some of that a little bit. It's kind of fun to do with a really light card table. It's pretty interesting. Whether you're getting information from spirits or not is hard to say. You'd really need somebody else there, a medium or somebody there, to at least give you some idea what's actually happening, if that was really what's going on there. But it's sort of a form of mind over matter because it's your unconscious doing things. It's just not using necessarily any psychic force or psychokinesis. It may be psychic if you're communicating unconsciously with spirits, though. That's one piece of it that could be going on. All right. Let's see. Jody, does the Forever Family Foundation have grief and loss resources? Yeah, the website does have some resources, but mainly focuses, on. We have actually grief retreats. There's one coming up in October here in the Bay Area that is already full up. They're adding a couple next year. We have like two or three, actually, I think 3 or 4 on the East Coast now. In Florida and in Connecticut, and then one here on the West Coast. We're trying to see about possibly expanding. But the website, very simply, is foreverfamilyfoundation.org. Just spell it out, foreverfamilyfoundation.org. And there are some resources on grief. There's actually a workbook that one of our advisory council people has put together. We're actually using that at the grief retreat coming up. It's available on Amazon.com as well, the workbook. So there are some things that I can recommend there. There's also a deck of grief-related cards that help you kind of go through your grief, produced by the Windbridge Research Center. Julie Beischel, who runs the center, has put that out. And those are actually on Amazon as well. In fact, because I bought them on Amazon just to have a copy of them. So I'm going to put her name in here. If you put her name into Amazon search engine, you should get to the cards and several books on working with mediums. She's done some of the best research on working with mediums. But the Windbridge Center also does stuff with grief as well. So those are the 2 places to go to as it happens. All right. So let me start out by saying we haven't had them listed yet. They'll be listed, I think, later this week. The courses that the Ryan Education Center are going to be doing that I'm teaching, and one other one. I know there's a couple I'm not aware of the entire schedule at this point, but I do know that one of my former students, Jimmy Aiken, who has a great podcast called Jimmy Aiken's Mysterious World, he is teaching again our Intro to Parapsychology course. That'll be starting I think the first week of October, first full week, I should say. So starting the week of the 7th. I will be co-teaching a class with the executive director of the Ryan Research Center, John Kruth, a 6 week class on ethics for field investigators. So for ghost hunters. So it's really important. We dive deep into the whole ethics thing, confidentiality, helping clients, all of that stuff. So that's happening. And then I'll be teaching 2 4-week classes, one right after the other. I believe those are going to be on Mondays. The first one I'm teaching, which will be starting Monday, October 7th, is a favorite class of mine to teach, which is I guess you could say it's popularly called Pop Culture and the Paranormal, but the actual title is Sci, which covers all psychic stuff. Sci and movies, TV, and other popular culture, other literature. So it really is a review of how people's beliefs have been shaped by novels and stories and movies, TV shows, certain science fiction, comic books, and reality TV is covered in there as well. It's covering a wide range of pop culture stuff. So usually what happens is my students tell me that I'm turning them on to movies and TV shows they've never heard of before. So going to be covering the good and the bad. So what's the good stuff, the good shows, the good movies that have come close to portraying things accurately, and the TV shows and movies and other things that have really gone far afield and even caused fear. I'll be touching a little bit on old time radio as well there. So it's a fun class to take. And then in November, I'll be teaching a class called People of Parapsychology. And that is going to be looking deeply, or kind of really looking into the lives of some of the notables within the field of parapsychology, whether they were researchers or doing field work, field investigators. We're picking and choosing specific people. There's going to be a number of people that I've known in my life, for that matter, so I can give a little bit more insight. But we're talking a little bit historically as well. It's not going to be just a history class, though. It's really going to be looking into the contributions of these people, their theories, what they thought, and the kind of fights that they fought to make sure that their work got out there, even sometimes to the mainstream to some extent. So those are some classes coming up. Again, they should be posted by next weekend on the Rhine Education website. So which is Rhine, RHINE, edu.org. It's in the chat. So that said, that was kind of my monologue there. Anybody have any questions, any burning questions they've got before I give a quick review of Beetlejuice, which I just saw today. All right. So I'm not seeing anything from anybody. I guess if everybody's a little quiet or just maybe not thinking about topics today. I do recommend, if you like the original Beetlejuice, go see Beetlejuice, the second one. If you did not like the first movie, I don't know that you're going to want to see this in the theater at all. It was honestly, I watched the original last week just to kind of prime myself. I hadn't seen it in a few years, to prime myself for the new one. And Tim Burton and Michael Keaton and everybody else did a really great job. They explained why Jeffrey Jones' character was missing. There's some really fun stuff there. They explained why the ghost, the Maitlands who were in the attic, Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, are missing, with one line that explained the whole thing perfectly. There's some really cool stuff in there, some cool other characters in the afterlife as well. Some really interesting plot points. But if you like Beetlejuice, you definitely need to see this one. I really enjoyed it. And I'll be picking it up on Blu-ray when it comes out later on. So I don't want to give any spoilers away. The one thing I did read, which was interesting because I certainly didn't calculate this, but Michael Keaton was only in the first movie for a little over 17 minutes. And apparently he was only in this movie for about the same amount of time. So that in itself is pretty interesting. So Anne, what is the new poltergeist model you're referring to? Do you mean the old poltergeist model, which we've been using for quite some time, where it's living agent related? Or is there something else that I'm not aware of? So I will be touching on poltergeist a little bit, not much, but this coming weekend, so next weekend coming up, I'll be up in Jackson, California. That's the Gold Country. And there's a paranormal, it's the Gold Country Paranormal Paracon. You can just look it up. It's goldcountryparacon.com. And I'll be speaking on Sunday, mostly about apparition stuff, but generally about ghost hunting and some ideas in parapsychology. And then also doing a workshop on psychokinesis, a spoon bending party, essentially, is what we'll be doing that Sunday as well for folks who might be interested. So if you're in the Bay Area or in the Sacramento area or want to drive a little while, then think about coming and catching up with me. So I'll be there as a Friday evening. We have a kind of meet and greet. All right. Are people still trapped in civil service jobs in the afterlife? Well, they were actually in the original Beetlejuice, so you're not giving any giving away any spoilers here. So yes, that's clearly the case. Let's see. All right. Barbara, you just heard about Jane Roberts, the Seth books. So channeling is a really interesting thing. And if you can find a copy of a book called Channeling by John Klimo, it's Jonklimo, John Klimo. I don't know if the book's still in print or not, but that's like the book on channeling. John was one of the best researchers on that subject out there. And, back during the 1980s, channeling was a major thing. Spirit mediumship wasn't big, but channeling was very, very big. And there's different kinds of channelers. The Set books are interesting because Jane Roberts produced information or theories or kind of creative information that was outside of her range of experience and knowledge base. Still kind of questionable as how much physics is really involved there. But, that was a really interesting long-term channeling situation. That I would say is worth reading. If you haven't read the Seth books, those are definitely worth reading. A lot of channelers were giving advice and information when they weren't fraudulent, because there were a lot of fraudulent channelers out there. They were giving information that sounded like pop psychology. In fact, Dr. Phil would have been a great channeler. Dr. Joyce Brothers back then. There wasn't any there a lot of times. But there were some interesting characteristics that were happening. And several of the channelers that I worked with were not clear whether or not the personalities that came through were really part of them or from the outside. And they admitted that. One of them, in fact, realized that it was probably her with these other characters. Coming through with sometimes really interesting information that was psychic, she integrated it all and became a really good psychic and medium. She realized this was part of her personality that was kind of providing her some ground that she could talk about things psychically without having to take personal responsibility, because it wasn't her, it was Archon of the Pleiades, for example. And it's a really interesting phenomenon in that way. What do you think about chaos magic? All I can tell you is to read Dean Radin's book, Real Magic. I mean, the whole idea of magic is the intention behind whatever you do, whether it's a ritual, whatever you're doing in magic, it's intention, and intention's behind psychokinesis. So it may be that there's some influence there, but as a practice, I don't see it as anything different than other practices at all. Okay, let's see here. Seems to be a bit of increase of UK on UFO. No idea. I don't deal with UFOs at all, Ian. Anne. Oh, so Echo. It's AECKO. And this is not really a model of poltergeist activity. It's a way of us identifying particular types of poltergeist cases that have communal activity. So in other words, family or group of people that are witnessing or having the experiences of being in the case. with no explanation, and usually with a psychological element to it, which all poltergeist cases have. So we have poltergeist cases where they may not be communal in the sense that it may only be one person who's witnessing things, or even if they're external witnesses, they're not part of the family set of the community in that way. And there also are cases in which it's the family dynamic that seems to be triggering whatever is actually happening there. I'm still waiting for Jerry Salfin and Brian Williams to actually put out their paper on the echo model. But again, it's really more of categorization than an explanation. Jerry Salfin doesn't like to say that we can just say it's PK, even though if somebody's mind is moving something, that is psychokinesis. This is a way of looking at the case differently from kind of a more of an external pathway itself. AECKO is what it is. John, you read all the set stuff? Yeah, I mean, I read the set stuff, God, decades ago. I couldn't even mentally talk about specific books at all. All right. What are your thoughts on REM pods and other devices in ghost hunts? I was just telling my producer, I was just interviewed by someone from Wirecutter at the New York Times talking about this equipment. And honestly, if you're spending the kind of money they charge for those devices, you are sorely being taken advantage of. The REM pods, except for the pretty lights on it, the REM pod itself is simply a $20, $25 theremin kit. A theremin is a musical instrument that you play with your electromagnetic field close to the antenna, and by moving your hand up and down and certain distances from the antenna, you can create tones. And music, in fact, one of my favorite all-time movies, Forbidden Planet, 1956 movie, science fiction film, which was the stimulus or the inspiration for Star Trek in many respects. Even Gene Roddenberry mentioned that. The entire soundtrack is done with a theremin. They can also be very, very too sensitive. If you leave it on in your home, it's going to go off at all times, not because there's something paranormal, but because the electromagnetic environment does fluctuate. And it's likely that the casing of the REM pod costs significantly more money to manufacture than just that theremin kit that's inside. So you can do your same. If you're going to spend that kind of money, buy yourself a theremin, because not only will you have the same functionality audio-wise, you may not have the visual lights, but you will have a musical instrument you can learn to play. All right, other devices, and I'll just say this right off the bat, there are no devices we know for sure that can detect ghosts, partly because we don't know what they're made out of, and we don't know what every ghost can do, because every ghost they're not all the same, it seems. There are only a few instances of cases, a small percentage of ghosts who seem to be able to move things, for example, because probably they haven't figured out how to do it. I use an EMF meter. I use other devices to check the environment. We do not use devices in our field to detect ghosts. We use devices to get a sense of the environment when nothing is happening, when something is experienced, because if you don't have somebody having an experience, you have no idea if there's a ghost there. You have no idea if there's a haunting. You need a human being to give context and meaning to anything. Actually, just to give you an idea that there's even a haunting happening. So any of the devices that are technically environmental sensors can be used if they're used to gather environmental information, but you still need a human being to say, hey, I'm sensing there's something going on here. I'm sensing there's a ghost. And it needs to connect with the witness testimony, the experiences of the witnesses. Otherwise, you're just following what they do on TV, and producers are more interested in devices that somebody says are ghost detectors, have pretty lights and make sounds, because that's good TV, than they are about anything that has any sort of validity to it. It's just that there are a lot of manufacturers now, people selling these devices, because it's a whole cottage industry. People are making big bucks. Those cat toys that have been repackaged and sold for significantly more money, 5 or 10 times what they actually cost. Those are little balls that light up when they move. Buy cat toys. If you need to buy a temperature sensor because people are reporting temperature changes, go to Walmart or Target, spend $10 on an indoor-outdoor thermometer, which has two small devices. I have one of these. One is for outdoor, one is for indoor, but you can use both indoor. And they take, the AAA batteries, and they're wireless, and they work up to 100 feet. And somebody says there's a cold spot over here. You put one in the cold spot. You look at the base station. You look at your temperature. You're only a few feet away. Is it any different than the cold spot? Usually not. So spend very little money. If you need to buy an EMF meter, find one that is used for other purposes than detecting ghosts. Shouldn't be labeled for that. Thermal imaging cameras, a good source to use. They're interesting. I will say that there have been some really interesting things that have happened with thermal imaging. My group, or folks that I work with, we did a TV pilot, which also was a segment for Japanese television back in 1993. And the Japanese company rented the early thermal imaging cameras, the Agema, that's the precursor to the FLIRs. Actually had a case that was nitrogen cooled. So we did get some really unusual anomalies when, and only when, Mrs. Gibo, the Japanese medium, was having a communication with the little girl's ghost. We also had all of our other devices going off when, and only when, Mrs. Gibo was communicating. Nothing happened otherwise. I know other folks who have had some really interesting things with thermal vision, and it also corresponded to a human experience and often to other devices. So that's possible. But we don't think that that a ghost is being captured, because ghosts are not optical. And thermal imaging works off of heat. So that would not work with a cold spot, if that's what the ghost is doing for that. All right, let's see here. Could they be affected by PK? And actually, yes, that is true. Any device, one of the things we do know in our field, we have a ton of evidence that random systems, so I'd say that probably certain types of devices are more susceptible than others. But certainly the ghost boxes, the spirit boxes, which supposedly work off of random scanning or random selection of things, we have a ton of evidence that human beings can unconsciously affect random systems, computers, random number generators. We use random number generators constantly in our work. All of those are possible. There is other evidence that people can affect other devices that are not random in other ways, even some evidence that audio and videotape and audio recorders and video recorders can be affected by living people. So if somebody gets an EVP, you don't really know who's causing that EVP. If it's truly an EVP and not an acoustical signal, a sound that somebody picked up on without hearing it with their ears. I always recommend people, if you're doing EVP, plug up the mic input. Plug the mic input. Now, you could actually unplug it when you are saying the question, if that's what you want to do, and then plug it so that there's no external sound possible. Electronic voice phenomena is not something that's acoustical, so plug it up. And if you can't, I actually got this plug a long time ago, but all you need is some cheap earphones, wired earphones. Even some of the airlines give them away now. They cost a couple bucks anywhere, and clip the wires and plug it in to the mic. That's it. Now you've blocked the sound. All right. Dark Shadows thing. I'm just looking at this stuff here. Score of Ed Wood Dark Shadows use that. Theremin as well. Ed Wood stuff uses theremin. Theremins are kind of cool to play with. I got a friend of mine who's got one who lets me play with it every so often. One of these days I'll pick one up for here as well. I would not leave it on all day because it's going to start making sounds at really random times. Have you ever seen Kenny Biddle debunks of ghost hunting devices and phone apps? Yes. In fact, Kenny and I have twice co-taught a course for the Rhine Research Center, the Rhine Education Center, called A Skeptical Approach to Parapsychology. We will be teaching it again in the winter, so starting in February. So again, it's rhineedu.org. You can find the link in the chat there. So Kenny does still fall on the slightly disbelieving side, but he's much more of a straight shooter skeptic than the majority of the folks who call themselves skeptics out there. He's looking for evidence. Wants to see the controls that are there, and that's important. He mainly works on field devices, so he doesn't really look at the research in the lab that we actually have as well. So yeah, I mean, and sometimes there's with anyone who's analyzing things like material from old cases, old ghost photos or old photos in general of anything from a case that has some sort of anomaly or phenomena in them. There's always a question of whether anybody was present who saw what was photographed. And unless you ask that question or look into that, you're only guessing at what happened in the photo in that sense, except for certain things. So, for example, we're pretty much sure what orbs are, and they have nothing to do with spirits. So, for so many reasons. Let's see here. You digital recorder, EVP. Yeah, you can use, analog. I'd say digital is easier today. The one thing about analog, if you've got a really good analog recorder, tape recorder, that's great. If you're using a cassette recorder, just know the cassette recorders do pick up or can pick up radio signals. That's not intentional, but that can actually happen. So as long as you're plugging the problem is you're plugging the mic, it doesn't matter. It'll still pick up a radio signal. So, just consider that. I would use two. I'd use both a digital recorder and an audio recorder, analog recorder. Have you ever investigated San Remo? That's an interesting question. When was it? 1980s? Maybe early 90s, and maybe it might have been in the early 90s. Myself and one of my students did go over to the San Remo. We talked to the manager. God, it's been so long. Didn't really do an investigation, but we did do a few interviews, partly because we were looking for possible locations for a proposed TV series. This is in the very early 90s, or maybe even the late 80s. So, but I know that there's at least back then, there was some absolutely legitimate witness testimony of the place being haunted. So I will say that. Interesting place. Definitely interesting. I haven't been there in years. Something I'd probably like to do again at some point. Been to the Queen Anne, however, the Queen Anne Hotel in San Francisco, an old Victorian hotel, definitely haunted. There's absolutely an apparition of a young girl there, little girl, who died of consumption. And in fact, we interacted with her, and also Mary, who was the person who ran the girls' school that the building originally was set for. She's there from time to time as well. Some really good stories there. And in fact, in the book I co-authored with psychic medium Annette Martin called The Ghost Detective's Guide to Haunted San Francisco, we have our account of our investigation of the Queen Anne Hotel. So that's a good place to go to. Okay. Anybody else want to come up with a movie with a theremin? It's a very, very cool instrument. If those of you who don't know it, you can just simply Google that. Named after the guy who developed it. And they sell it on Amazon. I think the cheapest one that's any good, unless you want to do it yourself, which is the $20 kit. That one you'd have to put together, but you can buy an actual theremin for about $99, $100, and they have better ones but they're under $200. Again, they can be really fun to play with, especially if you learn how to play it. Have you ever been creeped out or afraid on an investigation? Creeped out by the decor or the conditions of a home that I was investigating, yes. As far as afraid, not because of the paranormal. There were a couple places when I went into, people had asked to come into, that were fairly unsafe. So I don't know if it was fear as much as common sense, but I did have a couple situations back in the 80s where I was called in before I realized that I probably should never go alone on investigations. We got calls at the university. Both were poltergeist type cases. The women both complaining, saying that they're being attacked physically, and in both cases, there were the husbands were not happy about what was going on, about finding another man in the house. And both cases, the guys were slightly drunk, and both cases, guns came out. So that was, it didn't take long. I mean, it was pretty, I was afraid at first, but neither there, I didn't feel, looking back on it, they weren't pointing the guns directly at me. They weren't, none of that was happening. Not that that couldn't have happened, but that was pretty scary in itself. Just remember that living people carry guns and knives. Ghosts do not. Not afraid of anything there. Humans are always way scarier than ghosts. That's absolutely right, Rose. All right. With the arrival of autumn, do you think paranormal activity increases on Halloween? I don't think so, but I do know that people are always looking for it. It used to be before social media and and paranormal reality TV, and really before the rise of ghost hunter groups, there were so many segments on TV news shows. There still will be in October. So on the broadcast channels, your local news, networks would wait to do a show, they tape a segment in the summer and hold it till October if it had to do with ghosts. The same thing with some streaming shows might pop up. So in terms of that kind of paranormal activity, it's one of the things I'll be talking about in my course coming up for the Rhine Center on pop culture. But it may be that people are a little bit more on edge thinking about it. But on Halloween itself, there are very few reports of paranormal activity because people are just so into, at least Americans are, for the most part, so into Halloween as a holiday that they're more interested in the kids' costumes, decorating their houses, than they are in noticing anything paranormal at all. All right. Ian, when you say haunted, do you believe spirit is capable of interacting or is it an impression? So when we use the term haunting in parapsychology, it's what ghost hunters like to call residual hauntings. I never use the phrase intelligent haunting because that implies a certain level of intelligence to ghosts, where I would say consciousness, but just like people are not all intelligent, ghosts are not always intelligent. They're conscious, but not that. So apparition is the term we use for spirits generally. But hauntings, there are very few actual conscious entities sticking around after death. Very few compared to the actual number of deaths. Very few reports compared to hauntings. Because I would count a haunting as even something momentary or something emotional. You can walk into a place and get a vibe for it and feel it just feels really bad. And I'll give you an example. And Jimmy, good to see you're here. Back in, I'm trying to remember, I think I was home from college one summer in the 70s. And this is during the disco era, mind you. And they had built a new hotel, Marriott Hotel in Elmsford, New York. And there were a couple of really great restaurants in there. One was a Polynesian restaurant my friends and I would go to because we were big into Polynesian drinks at that point. And they had a restaurant that also had a dance floor. So it was a discotheque at night. And when I got on the dance floor the first time, I got really nauseous and felt very, very strange and got off the dance floor, felt fine. I did multiple back and forth. I did some checking. My uncle had an inn at the county records, Westchester County Records Center, which also is a historical society. And approximately where that dance floor was, apparently there was a massacre of a group of Iroquois scouts working for the Continental Army. A massacre, an ambush by the Brits. So I don't know if that's what I was picking up or something else, but I heard from other people that they were feeling there was like bad juju, bad magic, bad energy on that spot. So we leave impressions behind. Tragic events leave impressions behind. Happy events leave impressions behind. We human beings leave impressions behind as living people. And that can be anywhere, literally anywhere. Okay. Theremin was used for Midsummer Murder series. Oh, interesting. Okay. Cool. I'll have to check that out. Spooky season. Still love Halloween is my favorite is my favorite holiday. We don't really decorate our house, partly because for years I was never home. I was out lecturing, and actually now we end up going to friends who has a, you know, they're in a neighborhood that has a lot of activity. We're in a cul-de-sac, and I think in the last couple of years we've had the most 5 kids. Even though a lot of kids in the development, they don't want to come down our very, very steep hill, or they don't want to go back up the steep hill. All right, Jimmy, I am teaching, as I said at the beginning, I'm co-teaching the ethics class, ethics and field investigation with John Kruth. I am teaching sci in movies, television, and literature, and other pop culture. So it's a pop culture paranormal class. That'll be the first class I start teaching on October 7th. That's a 4-week class. And in November, I'm teaching a new class, which is the people of parapsychology, which is going to focus on certain major names in the field and their contributions over the years. Okay. Yeah, I did rock the bell bottoms. Didn't have the huge collar, but, you know, I did have a leisure suit. I will admit it, back during the 70s. So, and I was even a disc jockey. So a friend of mine and I actually had a GJ service, which we just did on campus for Northwestern. A lot of the fraternity and sorority parties and some of the dorm parties as well. All right. And Jimmy Aiken, who's with us, is teaching the Introduction to Parapsychology. So those of you that are interested in starting, you can do that. Any of our courses can be taken in any order, but we do have certificate programs if you want to earn a certificate. And the intro course is a requirement for the majority of the certificate programs. So, Jimmy, I think you'll be good to have as a student in the pop culture course, in fact, because I know you know a little bit of that too. So, all right. Any other questions coming in here? Just looking at things. All right. It's such a shame you feel Halloween hasn't the same recent years. Kids still do trick-or-treating. You know, the neighborhood we go to in Bay Point, which is outside of San Francisco, people on the street, our friend's street, and like in the general, just a couple streets over, they like do haunted houses in their garages. There's people putting decorations out. People actually come from all over the area to go to this one neighborhood because of the decorations and how many kids are around. Sometimes it's hard to park in the area, for that matter. And there are other places, you know, if you look up on the web, kind of the best Halloween decorations. There's a guy in Martinez. I don't know if he did it last year, but man, his yard was incredible. He kept adding new animatronics and other things. Friends of ours who are in Point Richmond do an incredible, every year it's a different theme for what they have outside their house. This year, apparently, they're doing the Lost World, how should they phrase it? Journey to the Center of the Earth for the Lost World and Land of the Lost. I mean, they're doing also dinosaur-y stuff, but that's another cool place. So if you just simply, wherever anybody is in the country, if you Google your local area, look for local haunted attractions, look for local best haunted houses or best Halloween decorations, you will absolutely find people who have gone all out. No question. Some people like to leave their decorations up year round, which I would absolutely support for that. And thank you, Jody. Yeah. Yeah, disco was my thing. Still is to some extent. I have a really cool disco playlist for that matter. So I don't know that I actually use the word groovy more than quoting Bruce Campbell from Army of Darkness, which is also one of my favorite movies. Okay. Anybody have anything they want to throw in at all? Jimmy, you want to promo your podcast here and give folks the link to your podcast? Because I think it's worth doing, if you will. And if not, I'm going to... Actually, I'll have... So, Graveyard Grog, if you will put up that image for me.
Got it.
Okay, so take a look at this. I actually kind of put this out on social media This came through in a weekly email I get from the famous Weekly World News. All right, I'm still waiting. There it is. Um, if you folks don't know this, some of you may not be old enough, but there was a black and white tabloid you would see at the supermarket checkout stands for many, many, many years. It went out in the 2000s. And they basically did all sorts of stories about the unexplained, the paranormal, health, politics, all sorts of stuff. They had a mascot named Bat Boy, half bat. And the stories were ridiculous in so many ways. Very, very popular publication. Actually, towards the end of its run, it was mainly written by and edited by people from the comic book world, the science fiction world, Mad Magazine, places like that. And I even remember 60 Minutes interviewing the editor back in the 1990s. And at one point, as they're walking through the editorial offices, the whoever that was the interviewer said to the guy, "So, where do you get your stories from?" And the guy just turns to the commentator and says, "Oh, we make them up, of course, except for the stories about olive oil and garlic and the health benefits." Very seriously about that. So this was a publication that used to have whoever was president at one point, they adopted an alien baby every time. There was commentary about Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. There were all sorts of things here. So they came back to life a few years ago on the web. It's weeklyworldnews.com. Go to it. It's hysterically funny stuff. There's even video there. They have a movie coming out called Zombie Wedding. There's a great trailer. It's got some recognizable faces in it. And apparently they made a deal with, I think, Netflix for a TV series based on Bat Boy and the other Weekly World News stuff. So this one came through a couple of days ago that I had to put out on social media. All right. I think it's a commentary on millennials, but also a commentary on ghosts, for that matter. All right. There was actually a musical called Bat Boy the Musical, which was off Broadway for a while. I saw a college version of it here, which was not well acted, but it's a lot of fun. So I check my Weekly World News stuff almost every week. There was another piece in yesterday's email, which was about Keith Richards haunting himself because he was not going to wait. And I've got an old issue that has a serious skeptic based on The Amazing Randy, who after his death started coming back to people apologizing for denying that ghosts exist. So a lot of fun stuff that's there. A lot of UFO stuff, covering the same things that Jimmy Akin covers in his show. There's even a Bigfoot page, or Bigfoot puzzle page in the Weekly World News, so you can find. So good stuff, and they have merch as well. So if you're interested in fun stuff related to the paranormal, you can do that. The best thing about that publication is that, unlike the National Enquirer and some of the other tabloids, which were doing a lot of unexplained paranormal articles back in the 80s and 90s, people generally took the Weekly World News with a grain of salt, although there was a segment of the population that still believed everything they read in that tabloid, which was kind of unfortunate, but it's the same segment of our population today that believes everything they see on TV, regardless of whether it is real or not. So always going to be that segment. Going back to a comment to Ian, that's why I don't like to use the word intelligent haunting. So, Rose, you're currently putting together a paper on 19th century seances. Okay, debunking certain aspects of them. The early spiritual movement, I think, was sincere. Whether or not the individuals at the beginning were all sincere, there's questions, controversy about the Fox sisters, for example, who may have been, if they were completely fraudulent, these girls probably didn't know what they were getting into. And I think that's the case with some of the folks early on. They didn't know what they were getting into. All of a sudden there's everybody descending on their home to witness what's going on. That in itself can be very difficult altogether. But there were some really good observations of some of the early mediums that were there. The thing to remember, which is really interesting, is that physical mediumship, which includes the Fox sisters, were able to perform their thing in full light, in gaslight when they had gaslight. So basically, it could be in the afternoon, it could be in the evening, but it was light. Over time period, we saw a change in physical mediumship related to spiritualism, where the mediums more and more needed the lights dimmed and then out completely, and to the point where by the 1920s, actually even before that, mediums, physical mediums, as opposed to the mental mediums like the kind we see on TV today, physical mediums had to be in a total darkness. And there's a question that I've had, and as someone who is also versed in the history of magic, as in stage magic, as a performer myself, and having talked to people who are also historically very filled in that area, that era, certain things that there was two things going on, and well, I should say there were a number of things going on in the later part of the 19th century when spiritualism was popular. There was that. There was the scientific revolution. So basically, empirical science, empiricism came in. The Industrial Revolution was happening. We have the rise of stage magic, so stage illusions, stage magicians, and some of that was with the spirit theme. Some of the stage magicians were basing their act on what people were reporting the mediums were doing, but actually then taking it a step further. For example, the Davenport brothers in the 19th century were the instigators of the spirit cabinet. And that was an act. That was not anything close to real spirits contact at all. It was magic. But today we see mediums, physical mediums, doing spirit cabinet work in the dark, which makes no sense in itself. But there's so many different aspects of this. Mediums, the people saw an opportunity. So you have the magicians imitating spirit stuff. We have people who saw an opportunity, develop their own version of that act, and start performing as they're basically fraudulent mediums. And we're taking people for money. They're scam artists. And part of the reason why the darkness started evolving was because the darker it is, the more you can get away with if you're faking things. It has nothing to do with spirits needing the energy or something else like that. To the point where we can see in some articles in newspapers and other things that clients, people who wanted to contact a deceased relative, would go to whatever the local physical medium was. And if that person was genuine and could perform the light, they were considered fraudulent, because everybody knew that the real mediums could cause all this stuff to happen in darkness, and only in darkness, because the spirits couldn't even materialize unless the lights were out. So you have the potentially legitimate mediums who are also caught in the bind of offering their clients what the client wants, and the client wants darkness. Client wants window dressing. We see that today with psychics also. I've worked with a number of psychics who were caught off guard sometimes when they booked an appointment. Somebody comes in and the psychic is going to do a reading, and the person says, "Where are your tarot cards?" This doesn't look like a psychic's office. There's no crystal ball. I don't see anything like that. These are paraphrases of things told to me by psychics I know. There was a lot more than that. And sometimes the professional psychic, rather than arguing with them, and after trying to explain to them how they actually work, they pull out a deck of tarot cards, put them on the table, pick some cards, never look at the cards once, do the psychic reading, put the tarot cards away, and there you go. It's customer satisfaction, I guess. So it's very controversial, and it's really hard. I know that the Society for Psychical Research, those investigators and researchers, the American Society, did really good work, but things got murkier and murkier as the lights went out, to the point where today, trying to do research of physical mediums who will not allow night shot camera or some form of infrared it's almost worthless to do that, to do anything with them, unless you can totally control every element of the environment. And that's very, very difficult. Okay, are you planning on doing a Halloween special this year? Well, I will be doing this show on the 27th of October, so I'll have to do something to do with Halloween that night. Thank you for asking. Not quite sure what, but maybe I'll do something. Maybe I'll do a little. Well, I got some thoughts, so I will see about that. Yeah. But yeah, bring some Halloween related questions. Is it very hard to tell the difference between a good psychic and a medium? I would say that for me, it's not as hard as it is for the average person, because I'm well versed in mentalism, mental magic and the magic world, but also in psychic fraud and its history. But I also know what I'm looking for when it comes to assessing a psychic. So even if the psychic's not a fraud, they may not be a good psychic. So a good psychic to me can come up with information that is useful. And this is a problem when people get a reading. I've had people tell me they got to ask me about a psychic. I got a great reading from that person, told me all about myself. It's like, why'd you go in there? Well, I wanted to know something about a situation I'm involved in. Did you get to that? I usually ask. Usually what happens is they do a personality reading telling you all about yourself and people around you, which can be very specific. But unless you are able to ask the question or focus the psychic on why you're actually there, all you're doing is having a psychic show that they're psychic. So to me, a good psychic provides useful information based on the reasoning why you're there, is very honest about accuracy rates, because there's no such thing. A psychic cannot legitimately give you a rate of accuracy, especially if they're predicting the future. Anyone who says I'm 95% or 90% accurate, the immediate thing you should say is, how do you calculate that? Because they won't be able to answer that accurately at all. They won't be able to give you a good answer to that. And same with mediums, for that matter. With mediums, you should get more than a bio of the spirit. What you want to really hear are the things that would not appear on a Wikipedia page about the individual, would not appear on their Facebook page without any deep looking. The problem is these days everybody's putting everything up on the internet. So if somebody said, there's the medium saying she's saying that her favorite food to share with you was chicken parmesan. Well, if somebody went to the Facebook page of the client, they might actually find a picture of the client and the grandmother and a note that says, this is our favorite meal. So it needs to be information that is not that kind of thing. It should be mundane to some extent, but there's two main things with assessing a good medium. Number one, can they come up with information about, this is where personality comes in, about the behavior of the person. That's not something you get from pictures or even short video clips. When you're sitting down at dinner, your dad used to come up with all these really bad puns and jokes. That's not the case for every human being, by the way, every dad. So asking for things, or when you got into a particular situation, your mom would always say X, Y, and Z. So things that would not be in a bio, would be more interactive. And you should get a sense as a client that the medium is actually having a conversation with that person, is listening to a conversation for that person. But it should be good information. A good psychic will give you names, dates, and places if possible. That's not always possible. But predicting the future, a good psychic will tell you that the future is always in motion, to paraphrase Yoda. There's no set future. Here's the way it looks for you going forward based on what's going on right now. But once the psychic gives you information about that future for you to act on or not act on, it can influence whether that future comes to pass. So there are unseen influences, you might say. It's as hard as predicting the weather. It's really hard to do that. I actually teach a course for the Rhine Center on how to choose and work with a psychic and medium. You're seeing a lot of people using Barnum statements. Yeah, all right, there's two things. Barnum statements are just generalizations. That's the very, very basis of cold reading. They go well before P.T. Barnum. Actually, you can find them in old literature for that matter. First of all, generalizations are going to come through because the reason they're generalizations is they actually fit a lot of people. That doesn't mean they're not psychic. It just means that they might not be psychic. It really depends on the rest of the reading or the rest of the information. The other thing is that there are a lot of aspects to what is called cold reading that you can find on the. People always ask about that phrase. It's more than just giving stock statements or recommendations. Again, if it's just a general thing, if you pay more than $5 or $10 for it, that's entertainment. That's all it is. If you're trying to get some substantive information, is it useful information? Even a great psychic who's always accurate or giving a lot of accurate information may have a bad day. Is what I got useful? Because that's what you're paying for. Is it useful? Is it practical? Mediumship works in different ways for different people. And it's important to know that mediums don't always know where or who a message is for as it's coming through. On the other hand, on occasion, I've worked with mediums for the Forever Family Foundation who know exactly who it's for, who know what part of the room to go to. In fact, know exactly what person it's for. It just really depends on the kind of information they're getting and how it's being processed by that particular medium. We have very rigorous testing protocol for our certified mediums. Julie Beischel has put mediums for research through a 1-year program to make sure that they can get accurate, detailed information under controlled conditions. So, again, is it useful? Was the experience with the medium a good experience, a useful experience? That's really what it boils down to. Okay. The course, which we do not have on the schedule right now for how to choose or work with a psychic, is how to choose and work with a psychic or medium. That's what it's called. It's on the Rhine Education site, but I don't know when the next time is we're going to offer it. Maybe spring, winter or spring next year. All right, everybody, we're down to the wire. Thank you for being here. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you're not subscribing, if you are subscribing, tell your friends. Please tell your friends. I'm also on, of course, on X. I'm at Prof Paranormal. I'm on Threads, just Prof Paranormal. I'm on Facebook. It's lloyd.auerbach.author. Or you can join the Lloyd Auerbach fans and students page that one of my former students put up for me. And just engage. And I hope to see you again in 2 weeks on September 22nd is the next one. All right, take care, everybody, and have a good rest of the evening.